Across the vast expanse of the galaxy, civilizations rise and fall, like waves upon cosmic shores. For millions of years, advanced species have gazed into the depths of space, seeking meaning in the patterns of stars and the whispers of quantum fields. But there exists one prophecy, carved into crystalline matrices by beings so ancient their names have been forgotten by time itself, that speaks of a singular threat unlike any other. Not a plague that devours worlds, not a cosmic force that tears reality apart, not even the heat death of the universe itself. The prophecy speaks of a young species barely evolved from primitive hunters, who would one day stand as the greatest threat the galaxy has ever known. A species so relentless, so adaptable, so impossibly determined that even the most advanced civilizations would tremble at their approach. The ancient ones called them the endless tide, beings who would never surrender, never retreat, and never accept defeat. They described creatures who would turn every setback into strength, every loss into wisdom, and every enemy into either an ally or a memory. For eons, the great powers of the galaxy dismissed this prophecy as the fevered imagination of a dying civilization. After all, what could one small species from the rim worlds possibly do against empires that span thousands of star systems? They were about to find out. The species the ancients feared had finally reached for the stars. They called themselves humans, and they were everything the prophecy had warned them about, and so much worse. The crystalline spires of Zephyria Prime gleamed like captured starlight against the perpetual twilight of the world's 3 purple suns. High Counselor Vextara stood within the sacred archive, her 6 arms moving in practiced patterns as she interfaced with the ancient knowledge matrices that had guided her people for over 50,000 years. The Zephyrians were among the oldest spacefaring civilizations in the galaxy, their wisdom sought by hundreds of younger species who looked to them for guidance in matters of cosmic importance. Today, however, Vextara felt only dread as she reviewed the latest reports from the galaxy's outer rim. The monitoring stations had detected something that made her crystalline heart race with a rhythm her species hadn't felt in millennia. "Dear Honored Counselor," came the harmonic voice of her aide, Kethmore, as he approached with data tablets clutched in his lower arms. "The Terran vessels have been confirmed in the Proxima Drift. They're moving faster than our initial projections suggested." Vextara's optical sensors shifted to a deeper shade of violet, a sign of extreme concern among her kind. "Show me the recordings again," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of a dozen galactic empires. The holographic display materialized before them, showing grainy footage captured by a Zephyrian scout ship 3 solar cycles ago. The images revealed vessels unlike anything in the known galactic database. Crude by advanced standards, yet possessing an aesthetic that spoke of functionality over form. The ships were angular, aggressive-looking things, with obvious weapon emplacements and what appeared to be improvised modifications bolted onto their hulls. But it wasn't the ships themselves that disturbed Vextara. It was what they represented. "Computer, access archive section, Omega-7, she intoned, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the chamber. "Authorization. High Counselor Prime, Vextara of the 14th Ascension." The ancient systems hummed to life, accessing records so old that most of the galaxy's current inhabitants didn't even know they existed. Slowly, carefully, the prophecy began to unfold before them, in streams of data that had been preserved for over 3 million years. "The endless tide prophecy," Kethmore whispered, his own optical sensors dimming with recognition. "Honored Counselor, surely you don't believe—" "Silence," Vextara commanded, but not unkindly. She too had once dismissed the ancient warnings as the ravings of a civilization that had grown too old, too paranoid in their final years. But as she read the descriptions again, comparing them to the intelligence reports coming in from across the galaxy, the similarities were impossible to ignore. The prophecy spoke of beings from a young world, orbiting a yellow star on the galaxy's outer edge. It described creatures who had evolved from persistence hunters, beings who would pursue their prey across impossible distances until exhaustion claimed their quarry. These creatures would carry that same relentless nature into the stars, never accepting defeat, always finding new ways to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Most disturbing of all, the prophecy claimed these beings would possess something that even the most advanced civilizations lacked: the ability to unite in the face of extinction, to set aside their differences when threatened, and to emerge from every conflict stronger than before. "Counselor!" Kethmore spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "The reports from the hegemony border worlds, they match the prophecy's description of first contact protocols." Vextara's attention snapped to the latest intelligence briefings. 3 weeks ago, a hegemony patrol had encountered a small human exploration fleet near the Vega system. What should have been a routine first contact scenario had instead become something that still had the hegemony leadership scrambling to understand what had gone wrong. The humans had been outnumbered 50-1. Their technology was primitive compared to hegemony standards. By all tactical assessments, they should have immediately surrendered or fled when faced with the superior firepower of the hegemony's finest warships. Instead, they had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had attacked, not with the desperate fury of cornered animals, but with cold, calculated precision that spoke of military minds that had spent centuries perfecting the art of warfare against impossible odds. The human vessels had moved in coordinated patterns that the hegemony computers couldn't predict, using tactics that seemed to defy conventional military wisdom. When the humans realized they couldn't win the engagement, they didn't retreat. They had systematically destroyed their own ships to prevent capture, but not before ramming 2 of them directly into hegemony cruisers, causing catastrophic damage that crippled the entire hegemony fleet. The surviving hegemony commanders reported something that had sent shockwaves through every major power in the galaxy. In the final moments before their ships were destroyed, the humans had transmitted a simple message across all frequencies: remember this day. Remember that we were here. Remember that we chose to fight. They wanted to be remembered, Vextara murmured, the full implications of that simple statement sending tremors through her normally composed demeanor. Not feared, not respected. Remembered. They knew they were going to die, and their only concern was ensuring their sacrifice would be witnessed. Kethmore's optical sensors flickered with confusion. I don't understand, Honored Counselor. What does their desire for remembrance have to do with the prophecy? Vextara began pacing the chamber, her multiple arms gesturing as she spoke. The ancients wrote that the Endless Tide would view every defeat not as an ending, but as a lesson. They would learn from every engagement, adapt their strategies, and ensure that the same tactics would never work against them twice. But more than that, they would want their enemies to know that they were coming. She paused at the main display, manipulating the controls to show a galactic map with hundreds of colored markers indicating the positions of various civilizations. Look at this, Kethmore. Every major power in the galaxy maintains their borders through a careful balance of diplomacy, trade agreements, and the implicit threat of mutual destruction. We've achieved peace through the understanding that any major conflict would devastate everyone involved. Yes, Counselor, the Galactic Accord has maintained stability for over 10,000 years. Exactly. And now consider the humans' response to first contact. They didn't attempt to communicate. They didn't try to establish trade relations. They didn't even demand to speak with our leaders. They simply demonstrated that they were willing to die rather than submit to a superior force. The full horror of what Vextara was suggesting began to dawn on Kethmore. They're not interested in joining the galactic community. They're announcing their intention to conquer it. Worse than that, Vextara replied, her voice heavy with the weight of terrible understanding. They're telling us that they've already begun. Think about it. That wasn't a first contact scenario. It was a message. They wanted every power in the galaxy to know that there's a new force in the cosmos, one that doesn't abide by our rules, our treaties, or our understanding of acceptable losses. The chamber fell silent, except for the low humming of the ancient archives. Finally, Kethmore spoke again, his voice trembling with implications he was only beginning to grasp. What do we do, Honored Counselor? The Galactic Council must be informed. All the major powers need to understand the threat these humans represent. Vextara's optical senses shifted to an even deeper violet, nearly black with the depth of her concern. I've already begun the process. Emergency sessions have been called with the Hegemony, the Confederation, and the Core Worlds Alliance, but I fear we may already be too late. Too late? But Counselor, the humans have barely left their home system. Their technology is centuries behind our own. How could we possibly be too late? Because, Vextara replied, turning to face her aide with all 6 arms spread in a gesture of profound gravity. The prophecy doesn't just predict the arrival of the Endless Tide. It predicts our response to them. And every move we make, every alliance we form, every weapon we build to defend against them, it all serves their ultimate purpose. She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed detailed tactical analyses of the engagement at Vega. Look at what we're already doing. The hegemony is reinforcing their border worlds. The Confederation is mobilizing their reserve fleets. The core worlds are activating defensive protocols that haven't been used since the last galactic war. Those seem like reasonable precautions, Kethmore observed, though uncertainty crept into his voice. On the surface, yes. But consider the humans' perspective. They've just demonstrated to the entire galaxy that they're a credible threat. Now they're watching as every major power diverts resources to defend against them. They're forcing us to militarize, to abandon the diplomatic solutions that have kept peace for millennia. Vexthara manipulated the display again, showing projected resource allocations across the galaxy. Within a year, every major civilization will be spending unprecedented amounts on military expansion. Within 5 years, the careful balance of power that has prevented galactic war will be completely destabilized, and the humans will be watching, learning, adapting to our responses. But surely our combined forces would be more than enough to... To what? Vexthara interrupted. To destroy them. Even if we could locate their homeworld and mount a successful assault, what then? We would have proven to every minor power in the galaxy that the major civilizations are willing to commit genocide to maintain their dominance. How long before those smaller empires begin to see us as the real threat? The terrible elegance of the human strategy was becoming clear to Kethmore. They're not trying to win a military victory. They're forcing us to destroy the very system that keeps the galaxy stable. Precisely. And once that system collapses, once the major powers are too busy fighting each other to maintain their borders, the humans will expand into the chaos we've created. They'll offer protection to smaller civilizations, alliance to those who feel threatened by the larger empires, and hope to those who believe the old order has failed them. Vexthara gestured to another section of the display, showing migration patterns and trade routes throughout the galaxy. The prophecy calls them the endless tide for a reason. They don't need to conquer us through military force. They just need to outlast us, outbreed us, and outadapt us. Every world they settle, every species they ally with, every problem they solve that we can't, it all adds to their influence. Then what do you recommend, honored counselor? If military action will only serve their purposes, and diplomatic contact seems impossible after the Vega incident, what options remain? Vexthara was quiet for a long moment, her optical senses dimming as she processed the full implications of their situation. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a tone that Kethmore had never heard from his normally confident leader. Uncertainty. I don't know, she admitted. For the first time in 50,000 years of recorded history, the Zephyrian archives offer no clear path forward. The ancients who wrote the prophecy provided extensive details about the humans' nature and their likely strategies, but they offered no guidance on how to counter them. She paused, accessing deeper levels of the archive with growing desperation.
In fact, the more I study their records, the more I suspect that the ancients didn't intend the prophecy as a warning.
They wrote it as an inevitability. What do you mean? The final passage of the prophecy, Vexthara said, her voice barely audible. It doesn't end with the defeat of the endless tide. It ends with their acceptance. The ancients predicted that eventually every civilization in the galaxy would come to see the humans, not as invaders, but as the natural evolution of galactic society. The implications of this revelation settled over them like a dark tide. If the prophecy was correct, then everything they thought they knew about their place in the cosmos was about to change. The age of the ancient civilizations was ending, whether they accepted it gracefully or fought against it with their dying breath. Counselor, Kethmore said quietly, what do we tell the Galactic Council? Vexthara straightened to her full height, her optical senses returning to their normal shade as she made her decision. We tell them the truth. We tell them that the prophecy has been fulfilled, that the humans represent a fundamental shift in the balance of galactic power, and that every civilization must now choose how they want to face the future. And if they choose to fight, then they will learn what the ancients knew, that some tides cannot be stopped, only survived. The question is not whether the humans will reshape the galaxy. The question is whether we will adapt to the changes they bring, or be swept away by our refusal to accept them. As if summoned by her words, new alerts began flashing across the communication console. Reports of human ships appearing in systems across the Outer Rim, not attacking, not communicating, just watching, learning, preparing. The age of humanity had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. Fleet Admiral Korith Vex stood on the bridge of the Hegemony Dreadnought, inevitable victory, his scaled hands gripping the command console as he studied the tactical displays, showing the current positions of every major fleet in Hegemony space. For 300 years, he had served the hegemony military with distinction, rising through the ranks to command the most powerful naval force in known space. His species, the Caliph, had built their reputation on military precision and unwavering discipline. They had never encountered an enemy they couldn't defeat through superior tactics and overwhelming firepower. The humans were about to teach them the difference between victory and survival. "Admiral," called Commander Thessarian from the communications station, her crest feathers rippling with nervous energy. "We're receiving priority transmissions from High Command. The Emergency Council has reached a decision regarding the human threat." Korath's yellow eyes narrowed as he processed the encrypted message. The hegemony's response was exactly what he had expected and exactly what he feared. Operation Cleansing Dawn would commence within the next solar cycle, mobilizing the largest military force in hegemony history to eliminate the human threat before it could spread beyond the Outer Rim systems. "Transmit fleet positioning to all task force commanders," Korath ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never questioned a direct command. "We launch at 0600 standard. Target priority is the Sol system and any human colonies identified by long-range reconnaissance." But even as he gave the orders, doubt gnawed at him, like acid through armor plating. The engagement at Vega had been analyzed dozens of times by the hegemony's finest tactical computers, and every simulation reached the same impossible conclusion. The humans had known exactly how the hegemony would respond. The human vessels had been positioned in perfect formation to maximize damage when they initiated their suicide runs. Their targeting had been precise enough to cripple rather than destroy the hegemony cruisers, ensuring survivors who could report what they had witnessed. Even their final transmission had been calculated for maximum psychological impact, delivered on frequencies specifically chosen to penetrate hegemony communication protocols. Most disturbing of all, analysis of the wreckage had revealed that the human ships carried no colony equipment, no scientific instruments, no supplies for extended exploration. They had been built for one purpose: to die in exactly the manner they had chosen. The humans had planned their own deaths down to the smallest detail, all to deliver a message that was only now becoming clear. "Admiral," Thessarian called again, this time with barely concealed urgency. "Long-range sensors are detecting movement in the Kepler sector. Multiple human vessels, moving in formation toward our border worlds." Korath studied the sensor data with growing unease. 12 human ships, arranged in a pattern that looked almost ceremonial. They weren't approaching with the tactical formations of a military force, nor were they broadcasting any attempts at communication. They were simply moving steadily toward hegemony space at a speed that would bring them to the border in exactly 72 hours.
"Sir," the tactical officer spoke up from his station, "the timing is too precise to be coincidental."
"They'll arrive exactly when our fleet launches Operation Cleansing Dawn." The realization hit Korath like a physical blow. The humans weren't just responding to hegemony movements, they were orchestrating them. Somehow, they had predicted the exact timeline of the hegemony's military response and positioned their forces accordingly. "Tactical analysis of human vessel movements," Korath commanded, his voice steady despite the growing turmoil in his thoughts. Cross-reference with all known intelligence on human capabilities in previous encounters. The main display shifted to show a comprehensive overview of every confirmed human contact over the past month. What Korath saw made his blood run cold. The encounters weren't random. They formed a pattern that encompassed every major power in the galaxy, each contact carefully timed and positioned to maximize the political and military response. The Confederation had encountered human vessels near their research stations, leading to a massive increase in border security. The Core Worlds Alliance had detected human communications intercepts, prompting them to change all their military codes. The Merchants Guild had reported human ships observing their trade routes, causing them to reroute valuable cargo through more heavily defended systems. Each contact had been designed to provoke a specific response, and each response had played perfectly into what appeared to be a larger human strategy. They were manipulating the entire galaxy like pieces on a game board, forcing every major power to react exactly as they wanted. "Commander Thessarian," Korath said quietly, "get me a secure channel to High Command. Priority Alpha." While his communications officer worked to establish the connection, Korath studied the tactical data one more time. The human force approaching their borders was tiny by hegemony standards. 12 ships against a military infrastructure that spanned dozens of star systems. But if his analysis was correct, those 12 ships weren't meant to fight the hegemony fleet. They were meant to ensure that Operation Cleansing Dawn would have exactly the consequences the humans wanted. "Channel established, Admiral," Thessarian reported. The holographic image of High Admiral Nexus materialized before Korath's command console. Nexus was old even by Kalis standards, his scales darkened with age and his crest marked with the scars of a dozen major campaigns. He had served the hegemony for over 4 centuries and had never lost a strategic engagement. "Admiral Korath," Nexus spoke with the gravitas of ultimate military authority. "Your fleet status report?" All vessels are prepared for deployment, High Admiral, but I must request permission to delay the operation pending additional intelligence analysis. Nexus's eyes flashed with irritation. Explain. Korath chose his words carefully, knowing that what he was about to suggest would challenge everything the hegemony military believed about warfare. Sir, I believe we are not responding to the human threat. We are being manipulated by it. Elaborate. The humans have demonstrated an understanding of our military protocols that should be impossible for a newly spacefaring species. Every action they have taken has been designed to provoke specific responses from every major galactic power. I believe Operation Cleansing Dawn is not our strategy. It's theirs. The silence that followed was deafening. High Admiral Nexus had built his career on the principle that superior force, properly applied, could resolve any conflict. The suggestion that an inferior enemy might be manipulating the hegemony's military response was not just tactically unsound, it was heretical. Admiral Korath, Nexus finally replied, his voice carrying the chill of absolute authority. You are suggesting that 12 primitive vessels represent a strategic threat to the most powerful military force in galactic history. This is either cowardice or paranoia, and I will not tolerate either in my command structure. So, with respect, I am suggesting that we may not understand the nature of the threat we face. The humans are not fighting a conventional war. They appear to be exactly what they are. A minor species that got lucky in one engagement and is now about to face the consequences of threatening hegemony interests. Operation Cleansing Dawn proceeds as planned. The communication link terminated, leaving Korath alone with his doubts and his orders. He stood silently for several minutes, processing the implications of what was about to occur. The hegemony was about to launch the largest military operation in its history against a species that had barely left its home solar system. The political ramifications alone would destabilize the entire galactic balance of power. Admiral, Commander Thessarian spoke hesitantly. Your orders? Korath took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he knew might be the most important decision of his military career. Transmit to all task force commanders. Operation Cleansing Dawn is to proceed, but with modified parameters. All fleet movements are to be recorded in detail. All tactical decisions are to be logged and transmitted to strategic analysis. And all communications with human forces are to be preserved for post-operation review. Sir, those aren't standard operational protocols. No, they're not, Korath agreed. But I have a feeling we're going to need a very detailed record of what happens next. As the hegemony fleet began its final preparations for launch, Korath found himself studying the ancient military histories that had shaped Calith's strategic thinking. Every great victory in their past had followed the same pattern: identify the enemy, concentrate superior force, and destroy their capacity to resist. It was a philosophy that had served them well for thousands of years. But as he read the accounts of their greatest triumphs, one detail began to stand out. In every case, their enemies had fought according to predictable patterns. They had sought to protect their territory, preserve their population, and maintain their political structure. Even when facing certain defeat, they had behaved in ways that Kala's strategists could understand and counter. The humans were different. They didn't seem to be fighting to protect anything. They weren't trying to preserve their territory or their political independence. They were fighting to be noticed, to be remembered, and to force every major power in the galaxy to reveal their true nature. 24 hours later, as the massive hegemony fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, Korath's worst fears began to materialize. The human homeworld was defended by fewer than 50 vessels, a force so pathetically small that destroying it would be less a military victory than a massacre. But as the hegemony fleet moved into attack formation, the human defenders did something that sent shockwaves through every commanding officer in the task force. They transmitted a galaxy-wide broadcast on every known communication frequency, ensuring that every spacefaring civilization would witness what was about to occur. To all who received this transmission, the human message began, delivered in perfect translations for every major galactic language. Bear witness to this day. The hegemony has chosen to respond to our desire for contact with an invasion force of over 2,000 vessels. They have come to our home world not to communicate, but to destroy everything we have built. Korath felt his blood turn to ice as the implications became clear. The humans weren't just broadcasting their own destruction, they were documenting the hegemony's use of overwhelming force against a vastly inferior opponent. Every civilization in the galaxy was watching the largest military power in known space prepared to annihilate a species that couldn't possibly threaten them. We do not ask for mercy. The human transmission continued, We do not beg for our lives. We ask only that you remember what you see today. Remember that when we sought the stars, we were met not with welcome, but with weapons. Remember that when we offered our hand in friendship, it was severed by those who saw us as a threat to their dominance. The human vessels began moving into formation, not for battle, but for what appeared to be a carefully choreographed final stand. They weren't trying to win the engagement, they were trying to create a narrative that would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. Admiral, his tactical officer reported, voice trembling with implications he was only beginning to understand. We're receiving communications from the Galactic Council, the Confederation, and at least a dozen minor powers. They're all requesting that we delay military action pending diplomatic resolution. Too late. Korath realized the elegant trap the humans had constructed. The hegemony could proceed with the assault and be branded as genocidal aggressors by the entire galactic community, or they could withdraw and demonstrate to every minor power that the hegemony could be intimidated by inferior forces. Either choice would fundamentally alter the balance of power that had maintained galactic stability for millennia. The humans had forced the hegemony into a no-win scenario, and they had done it with fewer than 50 ships and a perfectly timed communication strategy. Admiral, Commander Thessarian called out. High Admiral Nexus is demanding immediate implementation of attack protocols. But sir, if we proceed, we'll have to fire on vessels that are broadcasting surrender requests in 17 different languages. Korath closed his eyes, understanding at last what the humans had accomplished. They had turned their own extinction into a weapon more powerful than any military force in galactic history. In 36 hours, regardless of the outcome of this engagement, the galaxy would never look at the hegemony the same way again. The age of rule by force was ending, and the humans had ended it without firing a single shot. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in unprecedented circumstances. For the first time in the organization's 8,000-year history, every member civilization had demanded immediate attendance, abandoning normal diplomatic protocols in favor of direct action. The Great Assembly Chamber on Nexus Station hummed with tension as representatives from over 300 species gathered to address what many were already calling the greatest crisis in galactic civilization. Ambassador Lyrian of the Confederation stood at the central podium, her ethereal form shimmering with the bioluminescent patterns that indicated deep emotional distress among her people. As the current rotating chair of the Council, the responsibility for managing this unprecedented situation fell to her, and she was acutely aware that her decisions in the next few hours might determine the fate of countless worlds. Honored delegates, she began, her voice carrying across the chamber through universal translators, we convene today not to debate policy or negotiate treaties, but to confront a fundamental challenge to the principles upon which our galactic community has been built. The vast display screens surrounding the chamber showed real-time feeds from the Sol system, where the hegemony fleet maintained its threatening position just outside the effective range of human defensive systems. For 36 hours, the standoff had continued, with neither side making any hostile moves while the galaxy watched and waited. The situation before us, Lyrian continued, forces us to confront questions that we have avoided for millennia. What is our obligation to newly spacefaring species? How do we respond when first contact protocols are violated? And most importantly, what moral authority do we claim when we allow the destruction of an entire civilization to proceed unchallenged? A ripple of discussion moved through the chamber as delegates absorbed the full implications of her words. The humans had accomplished something unprecedented. They had turned their own potential extinction into a galactic political crisis that threatened to expose the fundamental contradictions in the Council's mission. Ambassador Vorth of the Calith hegemony rose from his designated position, his scaled features displaying the rigid composure that had made his species feared throughout the galaxy. Honored Chair, the hegemony objects to the characterization of our defensive response as a violation of any established protocols. The human incursion into sovereign hegemony space was an act of unprovoked aggression that demands appropriate response. Unprovoked aggression? The voice belonged to Delegate Xeris of the Altarian Free Worlds, her multi-toned harmonics carrying disbelief across the chamber. Ambassador Vorth, we have all reviewed the records of the engagement at Vega. The human vessels were clearly marked as exploration craft. They made no threatening moves until fired upon by hegemony forces. The humans opened fire first, Vorth replied coldly. They initiated combat against superior forces in violation of every known principle of rational behavior. This demonstrates either hostile intent or dangerous instability that poses a threat to galactic security. Ambassador Thalmor of the Merchants Guild manipulated his translation interface with obvious agitation. With respect to my esteemed colleague, the hegemony's interpretation of events seems designed to justify a predetermined course of action. The humans were outnumbered 50-1. Their aggression resulted in the complete destruction of their own force. This seems less like an act of war and more like an act of desperation. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of competing voices as delegates from across the galaxy voiced their perspectives on the human situation. Some supported the hegemony's position that the humans represented an unacceptable security risk. Others argued that the proportional response to 12 exploration vessels was not the deployment of 2,000 warships. Still, others questioned whether the Council had any moral authority to intervene in what was essentially a bilateral dispute. Lyrian allowed the debate to continue for several minutes before activating the chamber's harmony protocols, sending subsonic frequencies through the air that naturally calmed the various species present. Delegates, please, we must focus our discussion on the immediate crisis before us. As we debate, the hegemony fleet maintains position for what they term defensive action against the human homeworld. She gestured to the display screens, which now showed detailed tactical analyses of the forces involved. The disparity in military capability is so extreme that this engagement would not qualify as warfare under any recognized definition. It would be the systematic destruction of a vastly inferior opponent by the most powerful military force in galactic history. Which is exactly what the humans intended, interrupted a new voice from the chamber's upper galleries. All eyes turned toward the speaker, High Counselor Vexthara of the Zephyrians, whose ancient wisdom was respected even by civilizations that considered themselves her equals. Honored Counselor, Lyrian acknowledged. The floor recognizes the representative of Zephyria Prime. Vexthara descended to the speaker's platform with the graceful movements that had characterized her species for millions of years. Her presence seemed to bring a sense of historical perspective to the debate that few other delegates could match. Esteemed colleagues, she began, her 6 arms moving in ritual patterns that conveyed deep significance among the older civilizations. What we are witnessing is not a first contact scenario. It is the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy that has guided certain knowledge keepers for over 3 million years. The chamber fell silent as the implications of her words settled over the assembled delegates. The Zephyrians were known for their careful preservation of galactic history, but few had expected them to invoke prophetic knowledge in a council session. The texts speak of a species that would emerge from the rim worlds with a nature unlike any we have encountered before. These beings would not seek conquest in the traditional sense, nor would they pursue the technological advancement that has driven most spacefaring civilizations. Instead, they would possess an understanding of the true nature of power, the ability to control not events, but the interpretation of events. Vexthara gestured to the tactical displays showing the human homeworld surrounded by the hegemony fleet. Consider what the humans have accomplished in less than 2 solar cycles. They have forced every major power in the galaxy to reveal their true nature to their own populations, and to smaller civilizations that had previously viewed them as protectors. Ambassador Vorth's scales darkened with what his species displayed as controlled anger. Counselor Vexthara, with all due respect to your people's ancient wisdom, the hegemony cannot base military policy on mystical prophecies. We face a practical threat that requires a practical response. Do you, Ambassador? Vexthara replied, her optical sensors shifting to focus directly on the hegemony representative. Then, tell this assembly, what practical threat do 50 human vessels pose to the hegemony's thousands of worlds? What strategic advantage do they gain by observing your trade routes? What military objective does their presence in the Sol system serve? Vorth opened his mouth to respond, then closed it as he realized the trap inherent in the question. Any answer he gave would either minimize the threat the humans posed, undermining the justification for the massive military response, or exaggerate their capabilities to a degree that would make the hegemony appear paranoid and incompetent. Delegate Xeris leaned forward in her seat, her harmonics taking on the rhythm of rapid analysis. Counselor Vexthara, are you suggesting that the humans engineered this entire situation specifically to expose the limitations of our current galactic order? I am suggesting, Vexthara replied, that the humans understand something about galactic politics that we have forgotten in our millennia of careful diplomacy and managed conflicts. They understand that power, ultimately, is not about the ability to destroy your enemies. It is about the ability to control how your actions are perceived by those who witness them. She manipulated the chamber's display controls to show a comprehensive overview of galactic communication networks. For the past 36 hours, every civilization in known space has been watching this standoff. The humans have ensured that their message reaches every corner of the galaxy. translated into every known language, accessible to even the most primitive spacefaring cultures.
The image shifted to show analysis of the communication content.
Their message is simple, elegant, and devastating to our existing power structures. They are not presenting themselves as victims, but as examples. They are showing the entire galaxy what happens when a small, peaceful civilization encounters the benevolent protection of the great powers. Ambassador Thalmore's translation interface hummed with rapid calculations. The economic implications alone. If smaller civilizations lose faith in the protection offered by the major powers, the entire basis of galactic trade relationships could collapse within a generation. Precisely, Vexthara confirmed. The humans are not fighting for their own survival. They are fighting for the right of every species to determine its own relationship with the galactic community. And they are doing so in a way that makes it impossible for any major power to oppose them without appearing to be exactly the kind of oppressive force they claim to protect smaller species from. Lyrian felt the weight of galactic history settling on her shoulders as she processed the full implications of Vexthara's analysis. Counselor, if your assessment is correct, then any action we take, or fail to take, will fundamentally alter the balance of power that has maintained peace for millennia. The balance has already been altered, Vexthara replied. The question now is whether we adapt to the new reality or fight against changes that are already inevitable. The chamber erupted again as delegates grappled with the possibility that their entire understanding of galactic politics was about to be rendered obsolete. Some demanded immediate action to prevent the humans from spreading their influence. Others called for diplomatic intervention to find a peaceful resolution. Still others argued that the Council should remain neutral and allow the situation to resolve itself naturally. Through it all, the tactical displays continued to show the hegemony fleet maintaining its threatening position, while human vessels moved in patterns that seemed designed to maximize the visual impact of their defensive posture. Every movement was being broadcast across the galaxy. Every formation was being analyzed by military experts from hundreds of civilizations, and every hour that passed without violence was adding to the humans' political victory.
Delegates, Lyrian called, her voice cutting through the chaos. We must reach a decision.
The hegemony has indicated that they will not maintain their current position indefinitely. If we do not act soon, the question of intervention may become moot. Ambassador Vorth stood again, his posture displaying the rigid determination that had made the Caliph both respected and feared. The hegemony appreciates the Council's concern for galactic stability. However, we cannot allow external pressure to compromise our sovereignty or our security. If the Council cannot support our right to defend ourselves against unprovoked aggression, then the hegemony will be forced to reconsider our participation in this body. The threat was clear and devastating. If the hegemony withdrew from the Galactic Council, it would effectively end the organization's ability to maintain order among the major powers. Within months, the careful treaties and trade agreements that bound the galaxy together would begin to unravel, as civilizations chose sides in what would inevitably become a galactic civil war. But Vexthara's analysis suggested that this too might be part of the human strategy. They had created a scenario where any action taken by the established powers would destabilize the existing order, clearing the way for new relationships based on different principles entirely. The vote before us is simple, Lyrian announced, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the decision. Do we authorize immediate diplomatic intervention to prevent what could become the first genocide in galactic history? Or do we respect the sovereignty of member civilizations to resolve their own security concerns? As the voting process began, delegates from across the galaxy made choices that would echo through history. They were not just deciding the fate of the humans, they were choosing the future of galactic civilization itself. And somewhere in the Sol system, human commanders watched the proceedings with the quiet confidence of those who understood that no matter what decision the Council reached, they had already won the only victory that mattered. They had forced the galaxy to show its true face, and nothing would ever be the same again. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Earth Defense Platform, watching the massive hegemony fleet maintain its threatening position beyond the orbit of Mars. For 48 hours, the standoff had continued, with neither side making any aggressive moves while the entire galaxy held its breath. But Chen knew something that the watching civilizations didn't. The waiting was exactly what humanity had planned for. Her reflection in the reinforced viewport showed a woman in her mid-50s, with the kind of weathered features that spoke of decades spent in space. She had been born on Luna, educated on Europa, and had spent most of her career commanding exploration missions to the edge of human space. Nothing in her background suggested she would become the architect of the most audacious political strategy in galactic history. But then again, that was precisely why she had been chosen for this role. "Admiral," came the voice of Commander Marcus Webb from the communications console. "We're receiving the final update from the Galactic Council. The vote has concluded." Chen turned from the viewport, her expression revealing nothing of the anticipation that coursed through her veins. "Show me." The holographic display materialized in the center of the command chamber, displaying the results of what would later be remembered as the most consequential vote in the Council's 8,000-year history. By a margin of less than 3%, the Council had authorized immediate diplomatic intervention to prevent what they termed disproportionate military action against a nascent spacefaring civilization.
To most observers, this would appear to be a victory for the humans.
The galaxy's premier peacekeeping organization had essentially declared their protection over Earth and its colonies, forcing the hegemony to choose between withdrawal and open defiance of galactic law. But Chen knew better. She knew that the vote had been engineered to produce exactly this result, and that the real victory lay not in the Council's protection, but in what the voting process had revealed about the nature of galactic politics. "Commander Webb, transmit a message to all human vessels." Operation Revelation proceeds to Phase 3. Webb nodded, but Chen could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Like most of the military personnel involved in the operation, he understood only fragments of the larger strategy. The true scope of what they were attempting was known to fewer than a dozen people across all of human space. "Ma'am," Webb said quietly, "are you sure about this? The Council vote gives us the protection we need. We could end this standoff now with a complete diplomatic victory." Chen smiled, but it was not the expression of someone celebrating a triumph. It was the smile of someone who understood that the most difficult part of their plan was just beginning. "Commander, what do you think happens next? The Council has declared their protection over us, and the hegemony has threatened to withdraw from the Council if their sovereignty is not respected. How do you think this resolves itself?" Webb considered the question for a moment before the implications became clear. Either the hegemony backs down and appears weak to every minor power they've intimidated for centuries, or they defy the Council and destroy the basis of galactic law.
Exactly.
And either outcome serves our purposes perfectly. Chen gestured to the tactical display, which now showed not just the immediate military situation, but a comprehensive overview of political and economic relationships throughout the galaxy. For millennia, the major powers have maintained control through a combination of military superiority and political legitimacy. They could destroy any opponent that challenged them militarily, and they could claim moral authority through their membership in the Galactic Council. She manipulated the display to highlight communication intercepts from across the galaxy, but we forced them into a position where they can't maintain both advantages simultaneously. If they use their military superiority, they lose their political legitimacy. If they maintain their political legitimacy, they surrender their ability to intimidate smaller civilizations through the threat of force. The implications of what Chen was describing began to register with Webb and the other command staff. The humans hadn't been fighting for their own survival. They had been dismantling the entire foundation of galactic governance. "Sir," interrupted Lieutenant Commander Torres from the intelligence station, "we're receiving priority communications from human colonies throughout the Outer Rim. Delegations from over 50 minor civilizations are requesting immediate contact with Earth representatives." Chen nodded with satisfaction. This too had been anticipated. The Centauri group, leading the requests, just as projected. They're offering formal alliance proposals and requesting protection from core world expansion policies. The Centauri colonies represented exactly the kind of civilizations that the human strategy had been designed to attract, species that possessed the technological capability for interstellar travel but lacked the military strength to resist pressure from the major powers. For generations, they'd been forced to accept unfavorable trade agreements and territorial restrictions in exchange for the protection of larger empires. Now, they were being offered an alternative. "Begin Phase 3 communications," Chen ordered. "Transmit the standard alliance package to all requesting parties. Full technological exchange, mutual defense agreements, and shared governance protocols." Webb's expression showed his growing understanding of the scope of what they were attempting. "Admiral, we're talking about restructuring galactic civilization itself. The major powers will never allow this to proceed peacefully." "Which brings us to the final element of our strategy," Chen replied.
gesturing toward a new set of displays that showed human vessels moving throughout the galaxy in patterns that had previously seemed random. Commander, what do you see?
Webb studied the movement patterns, his analytical training allowing him to identify the underlying logic.
Coordinated positioning, but not for military action. They're establishing communication relays and monitoring posts throughout unclaimed space. More than that, they're creating an independent infrastructure that bypasses the major powers entirely. Every species that joins our alliance gains access to trade routes, communication networks, and technological resources that aren't controlled by the core worlds, the hegemony, or the Confederation. Chen manipulated the display to show projected growth patterns based on current alliance requests. Within 5 years, assuming moderate adoption rates, our alliance will represent over 200 independent civilizations. Within 10 years, we'll control trade routes that encompass nearly 40% of galactic commerce. The audacity of the plan was staggering. The humans weren't trying to defeat the major powers in military conflict. They were making them irrelevant by creating alternative structures that offered smaller civilizations everything the major powers provided, but without the oppressive restrictions and territorial demands. But Admiral, Torres interjected, this assumes the major powers will simply allow this to happen. Surely they'll take action to prevent the loss of their client states. Of course they will, Chen agreed, which is why we've spent the last 2 years ensuring that any action they take will only accelerate the process. She brought up a new display showing detailed psychological profiles of the leadership of every major galactic power. The hegemony will respond with military threats, which will drive more species into our alliance seeking protection. The core worlds will attempt economic sanctions, which will only demonstrate the value of our independent trade networks. The Confederation will try diplomatic isolation, which will highlight the democratic principles that our alliance represents. Webb was beginning to grasp the full scope of the strategy, and the expression on his face was one of awe mixed with genuine concern. You're describing a complete transformation of galactic politics, the kind of change that typically requires centuries to accomplish. Under normal circumstances, yes. But we've accelerated the timeline by forcing every major power to reveal their true nature simultaneously. The galaxy is watching the hegemony prepare to commit genocide against a vastly inferior opponent. They're seeing the core world stand by passively while it happens. They're witnessing the Confederation hide behind diplomatic protocols rather than taking meaningful action. Chen paused, allowing the implications to settle before continuing. Most importantly, they're seeing that the Galactic Council, the institution that's supposed to represent the moral authority of civilized space, is powerless to prevent atrocities when they're committed by its most powerful members. A new alert sounded from the communications console, drawing everyone's attention to an incoming priority transmission. The source code identified it as coming directly from the Hegemony flagship. It's Admiral Korath, Webb reported. He's requesting direct communication with Earth Command Authority. Chen considered the request for several moments. Throughout the standoff, there had been no direct communication between human and hegemony forces. The dialogue had been conducted entirely through public broadcasts and council intermediaries. A private communication represented a significant change in the hegemony's approach. Put him through, Chen decided, but maintain full recording protocols. Whatever Admiral Korath wants to discuss, the galaxy should hear it. The holographic image of the Kalath Fleet Commander materialized in the Human Command Center. Even across the vast technological differences between their species, Chen could recognize the signs of a military professional struggling with an impossible situation. Admiral Chen, Korath began, his translator rendering his words in perfectly modulated English. I believe it is time for our civilizations to speak directly about the situation that has developed. I agree, Admiral Korath. What would you like to discuss? I would like to discuss the possibility of a peaceful resolution to this standoff that preserves the dignity and security of both our peoples. Chen nodded respectfully, recognizing that Korath was essentially offering to negotiate the terms of hegemony withdrawal. But she also knew that any private agreement between them would undermine the larger strategic objectives that humanity was pursuing. Admiral, I appreciate your desire for a peaceful resolution. However, I think it's important that any discussions between our civilizations be conducted in a manner that demonstrates our commitment to transparency and galactic cooperation. I propose that we conduct our negotiations through the Galactic Council mediation protocols with full access for any civilization that wishes to observe.
The silence that followed her proposal spoke volumes.
Korath understood immediately what Chen was offering, a public forum where the hegemony would be forced to justify their position in front of the entire galaxy or accept terms that would essentially acknowledge human equality in galactic affairs. Admiral Chen, Korath replied slowly, I believe you understand the complications that such a format would create for my government.
I do understand, Admiral.
But I also believe that those complications represent opportunities for both our civilizations to demonstrate leadership in developing new frameworks for interstellar cooperation. It was a polite way of saying that the hegemony could either accept a humiliating public negotiation or continue the standoff until their own political position became untenable.
Either choice would advance human objectives while maintaining the appearance of reasonable cooperation. Korath's pause before responding suggested that he was communicating with his superiors, probably explaining why the private negotiation option had been effectively eliminated. When he spoke again, his tone carried the weight of someone delivering a message he didn't entirely agree with. Admiral Chen, the hegemony appreciates your commitment to transparency.
However, we must insist that any negotiations address the fundamental security concerns that led to this situation. The human expansion into hegemony space cannot continue without appropriate coordination with established authorities.
According to the democratic psychology and scientist candidate, the Compian and Romantis pair to the chairsman and his party with accustomed pair-foot protesting chair company.
Chen smiled, recognizing the opening that Korath had just provided. Admiral, I think there may be some misunderstanding about human expansion plans. We have no intention of claiming territory within established hegemony borders. Our expansion is focused entirely on unclaimed systems and voluntary associations with independent civilizations. Voluntary associations that appear to be coordinated through Earth Command Authority. Voluntary associations that are coordinated through democratic alliance structures that any civilization can join on equal terms, including the hegemony if they choose to participate. The offer hung in the air like a challenge. Chen had just invited the hegemony to join an alliance structure that would treat them as equals with civilizations they had dominated for centuries. It was simultaneously an offer of peace and a demonstration of how completely the balance of galactic power was shifting. Korath's response would determine whether the hegemony chose adaptation or confrontation in the face of changes that were already beyond their ability to control. 5 years had passed since the standoff at Sol, and the galaxy bore little resemblance to the ordered hierarchy that had dominated interstellar politics for millennia. Ambassador Sarah Chen, formerly Admiral Chen of Earth Defense Command, stood in the observation lounge of Harmony Station, watching the daily arrival of delegations from across the galaxy who had come to participate in the new galactic assembly. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built jointly by over 300 civilizations that had never worked together before. Humanity showed them it was possible. Unlike the imposing architecture of the old galactic council chambers, Harmony Station had been designed to accommodate every form of life that had achieved spaceflight, from the crystalline entities of the Zirian cluster to the gaseous intelligences of the nebula collectives. But more importantly, it represented something unprecedented in galactic history, a governing body where influence was based on contribution and cooperation, rather than military might or economic dominance. Ambassador Chen, came the melodious voice of Delegate Thissa, one of the Altarian representatives who had become close allies of humanity during the transition period. The final vote tallies are complete. The hegemony reconciliation proposal has passed by unanimous consent. Chen turned from the viewport, her expression carefully neutral despite the magnitude of what Thissa had just announced. After 5 years of gradual isolation and economic pressure, the Caliph hegemony had finally submitted a formal request to join the new Galactic Assembly under the same terms as any other member civilization.
I assume Admiral Korath will be leading their delegation?
Former Admiral Korath, Tissa corrected gently. He resigned his military commission 6 months ago to pursue what he calls adaptive diplomacy.
His appointment as the hegemony's chief representative was confirmed by their new Civilian Oversight Committee. Chen nodded, recognizing the irony in Korath's transformation. The same military officer who had once commanded the largest invasion fleet in galactic history was now advocating for the diplomatic principles that humanity had championed from the beginning. His conversion to their cause had been gradual but genuine, driven by his growing understanding of how completely the nature of power had changed. "What about the Core Worlds Alliance?" Chen asked. Tissa's harmonics shifted to indicate mixed emotions. "They remain resistant to full participation. However, they have agreed to observer status and limited cooperation in the mutual defense protocols. Their representative insists that they're still evaluating the long-term viability of the new frameworks." Translation: They were still hoping that the old order would somehow reassert itself, despite overwhelming evidence that the changes were permanent and irreversible. The core worlds had always been the most conservative of the major powers, and their reluctance to adapt was becoming increasingly costly as more civilizations chose alliance over isolation. And the Confederation? Full membership as of yesterday. They've agreed to restructure their entire governmental system to comply with the Assembly's democratic requirements. Delegate Lyrian says it's the most significant political reform in their species' history. Chen allowed herself a small smile at that news. The Confederation's decision to embrace democratic principles had been one of the most encouraging developments of the transition period. Unlike the other major powers, they had recognized early that fighting the changes would only accelerate their own obsolescence. The communications console chimed with an incoming priority message, drawing Chen's attention to a transmission from Earth. The image that materialized showed Director Hassan of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, her expression carrying the controlled excitement of someone delivering momentous news. "Sarah," Hassan began without preamble, "we've just received confirmation from the Archaeological Survey Division. They've completed their analysis of the Zephyrian archives, and you need to see what they found." Chen felt a chill of anticipation. For the past 3 years, human researchers had been working with Zephyrian scholars to decode the complete text of the ancient prophecy that had predicted humanity's arrival. What they had discovered so far had been disturbing enough. Detailed descriptions of human psychology and behavior that seemed impossibly accurate for a civilization that had died out millions of years before Earth even developed complex life. What did they find? Hassan's expression grew even more serious. The prophecy doesn't end with humanity's transformation of galactic politics. There's a second phase, describing what happens after the major powers either adapt or fall. And Sarah? It's already begun. The holographic display shifted to show analysis results from the archaeological team. What Chen saw made her blood run cold. The ancient text described, with frightening precision, the exact sequence of events that had led to the current galactic situation. But more than that, they outlined what would happen next. The ancients called it the Great Convergence. Hassan continued. They predicted that once humanity demonstrated the possibility of cooperative galactic governance, other forces would emerge from the deeper regions of space. Species that had been watching our development for millennia, waiting for the right moment to make contact. Chen sank into her chair as the full implications began to register. You're telling me that everything we've accomplished, the alliance, the democratic revolution, the transformation of galactic politics, it was all just preparation for something else. The texts suggest that our galaxy is part of a larger community of civilizations that spans multiple galactic clusters. The ancients weren't just predicting humanity's rise, they were describing the process by which our galaxy would be integrated into a much larger cosmic community. The archaeological data continued to unfold on the display, showing star charts that depicted civilizations in neighboring galaxies, communication protocols for intergalactic contact, and what appeared to be invitation procedures for joining the broader cosmic alliance. "Sarah," Hassan said quietly. 3 hours ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected signals from outside the galaxy. The transmission format matches the protocols described in the ancient texts. We're not alone, and we never were. Everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe is about to change again. Chen closed her eyes, processing the magnitude of what Hassan was telling her. Humanity had spent 5 years reshaping galactic civilization, believing they were creating a new order that would last for millennia. Instead, they had apparently been preparing their galaxy for integration into something even larger. "Director," she said finally, "what do the texts say about this cosmic community? What do they want with us?" That's the remarkable part. According to the prophecy, they don't want anything from us. They're offering something to us. The texts describe technologies and knowledge that would transform every aspect of life as we know it. But there's a prerequisite for joining their community, which is a civilization must demonstrate the ability to govern itself peacefully and cooperatively on a galactic scale. They have to prove that they can set aside the tribal instincts that drive most spacefaring species toward conflict and domination. Chen understood immediately. The cosmic community had been waiting for their galaxy to mature enough to join them, and humanity's transformation of galactic politics had been the final test. Every alliance they had formed, every democratic institution they had created, every act of cooperation they had fostered, it had all been preparing their galaxy for this moment. The signals, Chen asked, are they requesting immediate response? They're requesting a formal delegation to represent the galaxy in initial contact proceedings.
The transmission specifically mentions that the delegation should include representatives from all major political bodies that have demonstrated commitment to cooperative governance. Fissa, who had been listening to the conversation with growing amazement, finally spoke up. Ambassador Chen, are you saying that the new Galactic Assembly was created specifically to serve as a communication interface with this cosmic community?
It appears that way,
Chen replied.
And if the ancient texts are accurate, everything we've built over the past 5 years has been leading to this moment. She stood and walked back to the viewport, looking out at the bustling activity of Harmony Station. Ships from hundreds of civilizations came and went in patterns that would have been impossible under the old galactic order.
The station itself hummed with the energy of creatures working together toward common goals, transcending the species barriers that had once seemed insurmountable. Director Hassan, Chen said, inform Earth Command that I'm recommending immediate acceptance of the cosmic community's contact request and begin preparations for the largest diplomatic mission in galactic history. Sarah, Hassan replied, are you sure about this?
We have no idea what we're getting ourselves into. Chen smiled, thinking back to the moment 5 years ago when she had stood on the bridge of the Earth defense platform, watching the hegemony fleet maintain its threatening position while the entire galaxy held its breath. Then, as now, humanity was facing the unknown with nothing but their ability to adapt and their faith in the power of cooperation. Director, 5 years ago we changed the nature of galactic civilization by refusing to accept the limitations that others tried to impose on us. Today, we have the opportunity to help our galaxy take its place in an even larger community of civilizations. She paused, looking out at the stars that no longer seemed like distant lights but like destinations waiting to be explored. The ancients called us the endless tide, beings who would never accept defeat and never stop reaching for something greater than ourselves. I think it's time we prove them right again. As if summoned by her words, new alerts began appearing on the communication consoles throughout Harmony Station. Deep space monitors across the galaxy were detecting movement in the void between galactic clusters, massive structures that dwarfed anything in their own galaxy, moving with purpose toward their local group. The cosmic community wasn't just sending messages, they were coming to welcome their newest members in person. High Counselor Vexthara, now serving as the Assembly's chief historical advisor, approached Chen with her characteristic graceful movements. In her arms she carried the original crystal matrix containing the complete prophecy that had guided her people for millions of years. Ambassador Chen, she said, her optical senses glowing with what her species displayed as profound satisfaction, I believe it is time for you to read the final passage of the prophecy, the part that describes what lies beyond the Great Convergence. Chen accepted the ancient artifact, feeling the weight of cosmic history in her hands. As she accessed the final sections of text, her eyes widened with wonder at what she read. The prophecy didn't end with the galaxy's integration into the cosmic community. It described that integration as merely the first step in humanity's ultimate destiny, to serve as bridges between different levels of cosmic civilization, helping younger galaxies achieve the same transformation that theirs had undergone. The endless tide, it seemed, had only just begun to flow. Throughout the galaxy, civilizations that had spent millennia focused on their own small conflicts and territorial disputes suddenly found themselves preparing for a future that none of them had ever imagined. The humans had not just changed their galaxy, they had revealed its true potential as part of something infinitely larger and more wonderful than any of them had dared to dream. And in the depths of space, ancient structures that had waited patiently for this moment began their final approach, carrying with them the promise of knowledge, technology, and purpose that would transform every species in the galaxy into something greater than they had ever been before. The prophecy was complete. The galaxy was ready, and the true adventure was just beginning.